Hi, everyone. What I want to share with you today is my proposal for a new framework for thinking about how to teach communications in the AI era. We've all had a lot of experiences over the past few years of AI disrupting the way that we used to teach communications. Right? We all know that assessments that worked in the pre-ChatGPT world no longer really work in the same way in the post-ChatGPT world. Whatever assessment we're giving, we have at some level to keep AI in mind. My suggestion to you here is that this need to keep AI in mind goes beyond just our assessments. It should actually influence as well the very approach that we take to communication itself. Now, one thing that's been very striking over the past few years is just how quickly this technology has changed not just how students approach communication and writing, but how professionals, pretty much everybody, approaches communication and writing. I think it is not too bold to say that really the AI writing revolution has already happened. Right? ChatGPT and other tools like it have completely changed how people write everything, from emails to reports to computer programs. It's kind of taken everything by storm. And there doesn't really seem to be any way to put the genie back into the bottle here. Right? We've already seen in our own classes, and we're far from alone here, that effectively all students, or at least a supermajority of students, use ChatGPT or tools like it to help them in one way or another with their schoolwork. Right? We know that the usage of these tools is essentially ubiquitous. And what we can see is that we're really in the midst of a technology adoption. Right? It's very similar to when the internet was being used by people back in the 90s and 2000s. There's always a bit of a curve, right? There's some people who are in early. There's some people who, are a little bit slower to get into it. But when it comes to AI tools, things have happened very quickly. Right? We're already at the point where a large percentage of the entire adult population uses these tools in one way or another. Right? That the pace of adoption of this technology has increased much faster even than things like smartphones and tablets. So what does this really mean for us? Well, students have already changed the way that they approach writing as a result of these technologies. And we don't have to think that it's changed for the better. We can maybe acknowledge that there's some severe downsides. I think that's not going too far to say. But like it or not, students do not approach writing in the same way that they used to. They've, at this point, developed the habit of incorporating tools like ChatGPT into their writing process. Now, this doesn't mean that every single student is using ChatGPT to cheat or do all of the work for them, but it does mean that throughout the entire process of producing some sort of communication, that some kind of AI tool is being used at some point throughout it. This is a big issue because prior to the advent of things like ChatGPT, the main thing that we used to spend a lot of time teaching in communications and writing classes is drafting and revising. Right? We might say that sort of the big challenge that we would always try to help students through when we'd be teaching them how to become better writers, better communicators, is how to overcome that blank page syndrome, right? Where they sit down with the Word document in front of them or with the blank page and they have to start writing something, right? The core of a lot of our courses over the last while was always multi-draft essays. Now, we may have moved away from formal academic essays in recent years, but this still is kind of in the back of everybody's mind, right? The thing that we're teaching is how to go from a blank page to something that's polished, that seems professional. We would measure students' original thought by the degree to which they relied on their own work or their own research and aren't just, parroting something that somebody else said or copying and pasting somebody else's ideas. We would spend maybe not as much time as we used to, but still quite a bit of time teaching students grammar, mechanics, formatting, APA style, all this kind of stuff. And the reality is, this is no longer the most useful focus. Right? The reality of the current moment is that our graduates are entering in workplaces where it's standard practice to use AI to assist your writing. Okay, it's no longer really the case that the most important skill that you can have as a writer is to go from a blank page to a first draft, or to take a first draft and to revise it. AI makes that quite trivial, actually. So, what's the alternative? What would a more forward-thinking approach to communications look like in a post-ChatGPT world? Well, in order to answer this question, it's worth thinking about what AI actually does well. And the way that I like to think about it is AI is extremely good at the middle of projects. And it doesn't really matter whether you are writing an article, writing an email, writing almost anything that you can think of, including computer programs, by the way. AI is quite good at going from the germ of an idea to something that is more fleshed out. Right? AI can rapidly generate content, produce new drafts very, very quickly. It's extremely efficient at synthesizing research. Now, the initial version of ChatGPT had very limited knowledge, right? It only knew things up to a certain year. But that's no longer the case. They can actually gain real-time information, and they can do it quite well now. And they can synthesize it into a wide variety of forms, which are really easy to digest and parse. AI is extremely good at adapting documents from one format to another. Okay, so you'll say, here's an example of something. I want you to change it into this other form. Okay, so here's an article that I've written. Okay, I want you to help me to turn this into a presentation. Build me the outline for a presentation. It's also extremely good at revising and copy editing things that have already been written, right? It can find errors really well. It's very meticulous in a way that's challenging for human beings. Really, it does a fantastic job at pumping out content and correcting what we might call programmatic errors. Errors where it's basically the same kind of issue, the same sort of thing every time. There's not really any nuance, something's right or wrong. Okay, it does this much better than human beings. Now, it is, of course, bad at a lot of things. Right? There's a reason why the concept of AI slop has kind of come into cultural consciousness. If you go onto pretty much any social media platform or YouTube or something like this, you'll find a lot of stuff that's been obviously generated by AI, and it has some defining bad characteristics, right? What AI is not very good at on its own is thinking strategically or making goals. AI doesn't have any will of its own. Okay, it doesn't really know what's important. You have to tell it what's important. You have to tell it what you're trying to do. It has no real desire of its own. It also has issues assessing whether something is good, and it's not amazing. It's getting better, but it's still not amazing at the kind of contextual understanding that humans have all the time. Right? So humans are generally able to understand in a given circumstance what's important and what's not so important. Right? What's the central purpose and what's more of a marginal concern for the task at hand. A good example of something like this is sometimes you'll have just a very quick question and you pose it to the AI and it'll produce like a giant answer for you, right? And it'll totally overthink a very simple kind of request. Or it'll just make, a really obvious error. It'll just misunderstand something really clear to a human being. It also is not great at detecting biases, right? It has its own biases, which frankly it's blind to. These biases are often put in there by the creators of the large language models, and there's something that we need to be aware of. Next, AIs really have a hard time being creative on their own. Their tendency is to reproduce the kinds of things that already exist. This isn't to say that new ideas or new combinations of ideas can't emerge from them, but left to their own devices, they will give you kind of the boilerplate response on pretty much any topic. Without human assistance, AIs lack common sense, and they lack what we might just call a human touch. Right? There's something a little bit alien about all of the works that they produce. Ideally, if we are thinking about what the best approach to communications would look like in a post-ChatGPT world, ideally we want some sort of approach which puts humans and AI to the tasks that each one does best. What might that look like? Well, my proposal is that rather than emphasize this kind of traditional writing process, that's always really been at the heart of our communications classes, where we start by planning, outlining, and we focus a lot of attention on the drafting and revising phases, right? Because this is where the bulk of the work always used to happen. Instead of focusing on this, the section of the writing process that AI does best, instead, I propose that we focus our attention on the things that the AI does most poorly and get students to sort of set the AI up for success. Here's what my proposed new AI native process of a writing process would look like. So we begin with a focus on strategic thinking. Think about what's the actual problem we're trying to solve, what's the goal. Mapping of our stakeholders in the audience, right? Who are we creating the communication for? Who cares about what's going on? We articulate our vision. We think about our metrics for success. We then spend a lot of time as well thinking about AI orchestration. In other words, picking the right tool for the job. Thinking about, what suite of tools we want to assemble in order to get the best output. Thinking about what kind of prompts we give the AIs, the contextual details that we give them, and the quality criteria that we're assessing the outputs. And then we let the AI essentially take over, under our supervision, this middle process of the writing process, where we have the AIs generate content, iterate it, refine it, maybe producing dozens of drafts, dozens of revisions based on our feedback. Right? When you work with these AI tools, you quickly come to realize the first things that they spit out at you are rarely the best. Right? Often the first thing that it gives you is not where you want to end up. But if you give the AI the right feedback and you tell it to change its emphasis, to change its format, to change whatever other things matter, you can end up with a much higher quality product. And then we end off with the back end, where we humans take over again. We take over the reins. We do some quality assurance. We verify all of the facts. We review the AI's logic, because sometimes they have very elementary logic mistakes. We assess the output for bias. We check that the voice and tone matches what we're actually going for. And then we integrate and synthesize the outputs into something that's professional and suitable for the task at hand. Okay, so here we divide it really into three main phases. Human-dominated front end, where we figure out our goals and the tools to achieve those goals. An AI-dominant middle phase, where we work with the AIs to have them develop the bulk of the content. And then a human-dominant back end, where we make sure that the material that the AI has produced is up to our standards, and we just get it ready for deployment. We get it ready for whatever it is that we're trying to do. Here's just what a simplified version of this would look like, because I know it's rather complicated. A simplified version of this would be, instead of the old writing process, we begin by defining our goal and audience. We then set up the AI to achieve those goals. We then generate and modify the content. We then check that output for quality. And then we finalize and share it. This is my proposal for what a new post-ChatGPT world really is asking for when it comes to communications projects. This, I think, is at the very least a sketch of what the communication process will look like in the years to come. So really what this entails is a change in perspective. In the past, every single step of the communication process was performed by a human being. The human was the performer of the communication tasks. We may have used tools like computers, dictionaries, library databases, etc. to help us, but we were still the ones who were producing nearly everything. With AI tools, this is no longer really the case, and instead we should think of ourselves as being more like directors of the communication tasks. We're kind of overseeing the process. We still have extremely important roles to play, but we are not necessarily going to be writing every single word of the communications that we are responsible for. This is why I call what we're doing here a vision-first process, because the most important thing in this framework that I'm proposing is having a vision, just like a director of a movie needs to have a vision, of what we're trying to achieve, who we are making the communication for, and how we can best realize that vision. This is something that I'm going to be testing and figuring out in more detail over the next few semesters. If this is something that you are interested in learning more about or testing in your own classes, please contact me and I would love to have a conversation with you. Thanks very much, and bye for now.